have 5 questions for you to answer. Did you have any questions before we begin?
No, I'm good.
Okay, perfect. So today, these are content interview questions provided for Attorney Bliven for the ebook. The first question is coping strategies. Best five, or however many you can think of, top to handling stress and emotional challenges during divorce.
Okay, so the first thing that I suggest is if somebody is going through a divorce case or potentially going through a divorce case, you want to consider hooking up with a therapist. Going through divorce, just statistically, is one of the most stressful periods in one's life. So more often than not, people get stressed. People can even get depressed. If they already have a mild mental illness, it's exacerbated by the stress of a divorce case. So if you're already in therapy, you definitely want to mention to your therapist that you're about to start or in a divorce case, so that they can consider whether it's appropriate to add some additional sessions to you or change the level of your medication or something along those lines. But like I said, it's never considered a bad thing, even on a contested custody or visitation matter, if one reveals, I'm in therapy. In and of itself, that plays zero role in any contested custody or visitation matter. It only becomes an issue if you're diagnosed with something that has some kind of bearing on either your fitness or your ability to care for the children for extended periods of time, such as multiple overnights or even one overnight.
Hmm.
So that's definitely issue number one. Issue number two is you want to check in with your kids. Um,
Yeah.
Again, just because divorce or going through a divorce is stressful on parents, it's also stressful on your kids. So, same thing that I just said in regards to a parent going through a divorce case, whether they're in therapy um, or not, you want to do the same type of self appraisal, so to speak, with regards to your children. So, if your children are in therapy, you want to check in with their psychologist or therapist and say, hey, look, I'm about to start a divorce case. Do you think it's appropriate that we up the number of sessions or medication level or whatever else? And if they're not in therapy, you want to really closely monitor their outward manifestations of stress. You want to even more closely check in with their teachers or their counselors or whatever else to see if, maybe they're not voicing that they're stressed out, but
Hmm.
oftentimes stress, again, it just manifests itself. So it'll manifest itself with acting out behavior or inattentiveness at school or something along those lines, or just noticeably falling off on the quality of their work at school. Again, they may say to the parents, oh yeah, it's not a problem, we understand you're going through your difficulty, mom or dad, you know not an issue on my end. Well, it is, and it's going to be for most children. So that would be issue number two. Issue number three is you want to at least consult with an attorney long before you even start a divorce case, so that you know what's involved in initiating the process, so nothing comes as a surprise to you when eventually you do file for divorce. So if you're not at the stage right away to file for divorce, but you're kind of more thinking about filing for divorce, let's say in the coming months or maybe next year or something like that, don't hesitate to reach out to an attorney, just again for that feeling out process.
Hmm.
um, I, for instance, have free downloadable ebooks on the homepage of my website, and that's blivenlaw.net, where you can check out those books, and see what the process is like. And that kind of dovetails into issue number 4, which is, um, you want to hire an attorney at the earliest possible stage. Do not trick yourself into thinking that you can somehow handle it alone. I have many people that think that way, that they think, well, I'm intelligent, I can do this, or I do my own taxes, so why can't I do my own divorce?
Hmm.
Or maybe the person is an attorney and says, well, gee, I'm an attorney, I know the law, I don't need an attorney to represent me. Hire an attorney. Hire a good attorney.
Right.
Hire a specialist. Um, so you want to make sure that the person knows what they're doing, and that they're not the type of an attorney that is a jack of all trades and a master of none. Um, and you want to speak to that attorney about, what is the process like? How do I gather documents? How do I plan out particular contested issues? Um, the last thing that I would suggest to prepare for a potential divorce proceeding, is once you hire that attorney, have regular check-ins with the attorney. So a lot of the stress, in going through a divorce case, is that people, they'll go to court, but then they won't circle back to their attorney, and they'll get kind of frustrated and stressed out because the judge will say certain things or other things will happen in court. And the people don't understand what just happened because the judges and the lawyers tend to talk fast and sometimes are over the head of the actual parties to the case. So I always recommend to my clients that not only should you do a check-in with your attorney before each court date, but you should have a debrief with your attorney after the court appearance.
Hmm.
So schedule a Zoom or a phone call or an in-office appointment, even if it's a short one, even if it's 15, 20 minutes. Have that check-in with your attorney and just say, hey, I was confused as to what went on with X, Y, and Z. Or another issue is, I don't know what the next steps are. Um, can you let me know, attorney? Well, if your attorney has been doing this for a while, as they should be, if you hire the right attorney, they're gonna essentially roadmap the case for you and take away as much of the stress as possible in your case.
Great. Wow, those are really succinct answers, David. That's amazing. The second section is co-parenting communication. 3 ways to build a healthy relationship for the sake of your children.
Yeah. So the number one thing that I recommend is get a parenting app.
Wow.
So there's many out there. The one I tend to use is called Our Family Wizard. But there's definitely other ones I know of, Talking Parents right off the top of my head, but there's definitely others out there. On Our Family Wizard, they actually have a nice article that explains the benefits of that program vis-a-vis just email, text, and keeping a joint Google Calendar. Because I get that question all the time. Why should I pay for this app that usually runs about, I think, about 120, $130 per year? Why pay when I can just text for free and email for free.
Mhm.
Well, that article will go into a lot more detail than I can, but to put it succinctly, that will organize by topic each discussion that you have, and in a much more efficient and streamlined manner than you will do or even think to do. And what you ultimately want to do is have those communications organized in such a way that if there is a dispute, the lawyers and the judge can easily follow the communication chain just on that topic. So you don't have, print out 100 pages of text messages that go into Sally's soccer practice when the real issue is Henry's schooling. Judge doesn't want to, no offense, read about Sally's soccer practice in the middle of all that. So that's one thing that I would recommend in regards to co-parenting. Now, another option is what's called a parenting coordinator, and really that's kind of just a new age way of saying mediation. But it's generally done either while the parties are in a divorce case or more commonly after they resolve their divorce case and little issues come up that they don't necessarily yet warrant hiring lawyers or going back to court, but they just have disagreements that the parents can't solve amongst themselves. Having a parent coordinator in place definitely streamlines that process and allows a neutral party that's a professional that has enormous experience doing family law issues to weigh in on your issues, and invariably they are successful in solving at least the majority, if not the vast majority of issues that crop up. So why pay each of you 2 lawyers and then have to take time off from work to go back to court on an issue such as, well, we disagree on whether Johnny should play baseball versus basketball or versus being in the school play. That to me, it's just ludicrous to hire lawyers and go back to a judge over issues like that. The third suggestion that I would have on co-parenting is strongly consider taking a joint parenting skills and communication building course. So there's courses both online and in person now that you can take. Take them with your co-parent. You are going to be joined at the hip with this person until your children are at least 18, and for child support purposes till 21. You need to be on the same page. And if you're not, get ready, build your war chest now, because you're going to be hiring lawyers and going back and forth to court frequently. So that's one aspect of that. Another aspect is engage in joint therapy. If there's already a communication breakdown between the two of you going into a divorce case, it's only going to get exacerbated in the divorce case itself, and quite possibly after the divorce case resolves itself. So what you want to do is work now on building those skills, those communication skills. That's not the role of a parent coordinator, by the way, because generally a parent coordinator is an attorney, and so they're not there to provide therapy. That is done by an actual family therapist, and you want to interview potential therapists and make sure that they have experience doing that. Don't just assume any social worker or psychologist, oh, they have their PhD, they must know how to deal with families going through a divorce case. Not necessarily. You want to ask. But yeah, those are definitely the 3 things that I would suggest that people can implement either before they file for divorce or going into a divorce or custody case. to work on their co-parenting skills.
Very awesome recommendations. Very informative. The third section, dating after divorce. 5 ways to explore new relationships and prioritizing self-discovery.
Yeah. So one thing that I would suggest is be very careful on dating if you have children, especially bringing that significant other over to the house. That's a very touchy issue, sometimes with the kids, sometimes with the other parent. Um, so I would just be careful about how you structure those other relationships. On a technical level, if you're married, um, you need to consider that if you engage in sexual relations, adultery is still a crime. You only become not married when the divorce is finalized. A divorce judgment is actually signed by a judge. That's what terminates your marriage. So a lot of people mess that up and they say, oh, well, if I file for a divorce, that means I can go out and date that coworker that I've been eyeing over the water cooler. No, you can't. That's still not allowed, and it's still a Class B misdemeanor in the state of New York. It's almost never prosecuted, but you may not want to be the test case for a DA that just feels like he or she doesn't have enough cases to prosecute. So don't run that risk. The other thing that I would suggest in terms of dating, either during or after a divorce, is you want to, and this is similar to the first issue, but you want to check in with your spouse if you want effective co-parenting to be done, as to how they feel in terms of introducing that significant other to your children. Don't just assume it's a-okay by them, or that the process is a-okay by them. Now, obviously, they don't have veto power, so they can't say, well, that person can never be around, quote unquote, my children. But they may want to weigh in as to the process, like how it's discussed with the children, how that person is introduced to the children, et cetera, et cetera. So at least reach out to the other parent and see how they feel about it. You would presumably want likewise on your end. And even if you say, no, I don't care, well, that may be the case. But if you want to have an effective co-parenting relationship with the other parent, don't just dismiss them because an issue doesn't matter to you. So that's another thing that I would suggest. Now, the other thing that you need to be mindful of in dating is, and again, this really goes to if you have children, is who the person is. So, you don't want to date a person that has a violent criminal history or would otherwise pose a risk of harm to the children. You may be surprised by how often I hear that even during or after a divorce case or child custody case is finalized, how a parent starts dating someone that has had their own children taken away from them by child welfare. Well, you want to be extremely cautious about that. Don't take the person's word for it. So you interview that person or whatever, question the person, and they say, "Oh, well, I got screwed by the system. I don't know. Child welfare really had it out for me." I would really be skeptical of that. It does happen that people get screwed by the system, whether you're talking police or child welfare. But that said, it tends to be on the rare side in reality. Usually, there's an old adage, where there's smoke, there's fire. Somebody got convicted by the police or child welfare for child abuse or neglect, there was probably something to the allegations. And you, before you start launching into a long-term relationship or introducing this person to your children, you want to make sure that you just don't take a person's word for it. Maybe even go so far as to say, hey, no offense, blame it on your lawyer. Say, hey, my lawyer said that before I go the next step in this relationship, I really need to see the documents from your court case, just to double check, because I don't want the other lawyer or my ex-spouse to have an issue with it. So, again, you don't necessarily have to police the other side, but you really just want to be mindful of that. Now, the other thing that I would say is, and this goes to the next consideration, is if you do not have children and you get divorced, then you're a free person. So don't allow your ex-spouse to dictate who you date at that point. If you don't have any children with this person, move on with the rest of your life. Feel free. Just be mindful that if you have ongoing financial relationships with your ex-spouse, such as property or asset distribution or spousal maintenance, something along those lines, that you just keep your new significant other away from your ex-spouse. There's no reason for them to interact at that point, and invariably that causes problems. And that kind of leads me into the fifth item, which is when you have divorce, custody, or visitation issues, or financial issues such as child support, do not allow your new significant other to be the captain of your ship. You always want to be the captain of that ship, and therefore have all communications with your ex-spouse, or the mother or father of your children. Do not try to push back as much as possible to keep your new significant other separated from those issues. There's no reason for them to get involved. And the minute they open the door and start to get involved in those issues, it's very hard to close that door without it causing problems all the way around. And invariably, that is one of the number one things that I have seen that has come up in my divorce or custody cases, is where the new significant other of one of the parties starts getting involved. And it's always a problem. They always see it as, especially if they're the significant other of the father who's paying child support, they always have it in their head that, well, that's money in effect out of my wallet and out of my household, and that doesn't leave enough money for that person, that father, to support my children if my children are living under the same roof. And my answer to that is, too bad. You entered into that relationship knowing that that person had children that he had financial support for, and that child support increases over time. So once every 3 years, at the very least, child support gets adjusted as incomes go up. The child support's going to go up. So just know that going in, and if you have an issue with it, well, don't date people that have children. That's the issue there. So I would say those are the five issues that you want to keep in mind in terms of dating either during or after a divorce case.
Great advice. Next question is the 3 warning signs budgeting for unexpected expenses after divorce.
Yeah. So one of the things that people do not anticipate either going into or during a divorce case is the expense. So I practice in the greater New York City area. That's where I'm an expert on. I don't have as much experience, really no experience, upstate New York. But in the greater New York City area, good divorce attorneys are very expensive. Um, so a lot of people will get into contested divorce cases and they just don't have an adequate budget to be able to afford contested litigation. And that's really, as a practical matter, a lot of people they're living with their spouse, so their two budgets are feeding into the same household, and then when they physically separate, the gravy money that they used to have, maybe they as a couple had a one or two thousand or $3,000 left over at the end of each month. Now, once you separate and you're funding two separate households, that gravy money disappears. And if you don't have gravy money to be able to pay your divorce attorney, it's not unheard of that in contested litigation, my bills to my clients get upwards of $3, $4, or $5,000 per month or more. Because I tell people very honestly, if you're looking at a contested custody situation or financial situation that goes to trial, now it's pretty rare that cases do go to trial, but you want to budget $30,000 to $50,000 for a one-issue trial. If you're talking multiple issues, so you're talking contested custody and contested financial issues, now you want to budget 50 to 100 or more. And the average ordinary person, realistically speaking, they don't have that kind of money. They just don't. And so a lot of people don't realize how expensive the divorce litigation can get. And so they just go through their divorce case, and all of a sudden, boom, at the end of the divorce case, they have maintenance issues, they have child support issues, and then they have to pay off their lawyer as well. Don't forget about the lawyer. That's the that's the number one advice I'd have to give in this session. But in terms of the other budgeting that you want to do, you want to take a look at, especially if you're the spouse leaving, but even the spouse staying in the former marital residence, you want to do a budget so that you can ensure that you can afford to live on your own and where you can live. So that creates a problem when parties are trying to work out like custody arrangements, because they're like, well, we want to keep the kids in the same school district, but to do that and have a somewhat co-parenting arrangement, the two parents have to live relatively close to each other. And I do a lot of cases up in Westchester where they might be living in a halfway decent neighborhood, but all of a sudden they split up, and now somebody's got to consider, well, now all I can afford is someplace down in Yonkers. No offense to Yonkers. So you want to sit down with a financial planner and say, hey, here's my net income. Here's what I'm looking at in terms of, possibly owing or receiving maintenance and or child support, and then work with them on expected rents and utilities and transportation and things of that nature, so that what your budget is going to be, and therefore what areas that you realistically can look in, what rents you can realistically afford, whether you can even afford rent. Maybe for a period of time, unfortunately, you got to live with a roommate or a relative or something along those lines. That's certainly not unheard of. Now, the final thing that I would suggest in terms of budgeting is you want to consider hiring a certified divorce financial planner as soon in the process as possible, especially if there's more complex financial arrangements that need to be done in your case, because that certified divorce financial planner is going to be a better person than your own attorney, no matter what experience they have, because we don't have, good experience in financial planning. That's why we're not certified divorce financial planners. That's why we're only attorneys. And what that certified divorce financial planner is going to work with you on is what arrangements in your divorce settlement are most beneficial for you. In other words, should you ask for more maintenance and less child support, or more child support and less maintenance? Should you mix and match maintenance versus a trade-off of certain property or certain assets? And what mix of assets should you get? So you don't have to just go in with a blanket, I'll take 50%. Maybe that's not in your best interest. Maybe it's in your better interest to take 75% of one asset and 25% of another one. Well, like I said, that certified divorce financial planner is going to be the much better person than your own divorce attorney to be able to advise you on what mix is going to be better for you to accept in the settlement.
Wow. Great, very comprehensive information. Healing and growth is our next session. And 5, or however many you can think of that come to mind, self-care suggestions for moving forward after a divorce.
Yeah, so I guess self-care is not really legal advice, but hey, I do self-care as a divorce attorney. So, and this kind of dovetails into the earlier session about anticipating stress. So one of the things that I would suggest in terms of self-care is, if you haven't been exercising, start exercising. Exercising is one of the best stress release things that you can do. So again, if you haven't been exercising, start. Whether that be an at-home routine that you know you can keep up with, or joining a gym. If you're not confident that you can keep up with a gym, hire a personal trainer to motivate you. Again, that's gonna alleviate stress, not only going into, during, but also after your divorce case. Another self-help tip that I would have is sleep. A lot of people, for reasons that vary, do not get adequate sleep. Either they don't get their solid 8 every night, or they're in bed for 8 hours, but they don't actually sleep for 8 hours. So again, this isn't legal advice, so don't say, oh, Dave Bliven's the expert on this issue. Definitely Google it and find out for yourself. But in terms of sleep, you want to make sure I got a comfy bed. I myself realized at some point that I was waking up with shoulder pain almost every night. And I had no idea what it was or why I was getting it, other than just getting old. And so I bought a wedge pillow. And now I sleep with a wedge pillow every night, stick my arm underneath the wedge, no more shoulder pain. And then there's obvious other things that you can do in terms of meditation, getting ready for bed, and just having a comfy environment. If there's any light coming in your windows, sleep with an eye mask. That's what I do. At one point, I lived in a somewhat busy neighborhood that was near a highway, so I got earplugs. They worked fine, and I slept like a baby with the earplugs. So I definitely suggest looking into that. Another self-help thing. Again, this was alluded to in the how to take away stress session. Um, take Consider therapy. Therapy works. There's a reason therapy has been around for hundreds of years. If you're not in therapy already, anticipate that you're going to be going through anxiety, no matter how tough-minded you think you are. Um, Stress is invariably going to come. Divorce is one of the biggest stressors that you will face in your life. So consider it. And again, if you're already in therapy, consider, talk to your therapist or your psychologist about upping the sessions or upping the medication or changing to a different type of medication. Be guided by their recommendations as well. Um, another suggestion that I'd have is diet. Diet. Again, don't take my word for it. I'm not the expert. Google it. You'll find that a poor diet can actually be a precursor to stress. And again, that dovetails into the stress that you're going to be facing either going into, during, or after your divorce days. So the time is now to improve on your diet. There's a bunch of good websites that you can visit. I'm not necessarily going to recommend any given one. Find a diet that works for you, but definitely cut out things like junk food, sodas, candy, sweets, sugars, anything like that. They just got to go. If you drink a fair amount of alcohol, either consider completely eliminating alcohol or going down to one drink with dinner per day, and that's it. Alcohol is one of the worst ways to take away stress. So don't think, oh, I'm going to go into my divorce hearing, and go home that night and tip back a few beers to forget it all. Bad, and bad. That's a horrible plan to deal with the stress. You want to deal with it in other much more healthy ways. I guess the fifth and final thing that I'd recommend in terms of self-care is you more want to engage in I guess the new age term is mindfulness, but it's really at its core just about checking in with yourself, whether that be doing meditation, or just sitting and thinking out things. So a lot of people, in terms of mindfulness, will do things like daily diaries, and one would be surprised at how effective that is in terms of mindfulness. But it actually, for a lot of people, it allows them to organize their thoughts and plan things out in a better way and in a structured way, so that their daily life is not so chaotic and stressful. And even doing things like, oh, if I know I pardon me, I know I need to be to court at 9:30, and the usual commute is a half hour. Well, that means don't leave for court at 9 o'clock. Leave for court, closer to 8:30, so that you budget for things like traffic, things of that nature, accidents, whatever. But so that that doesn't add to your stress. But you only get to that point, and that's just one of a thousand different examples in terms of planning stuff out for your life. It really only comes in by actually sitting down, analyzing your life, where your stresses are coming from, and then plan out a way to reduce that stress. If you can't do it on your own, then that dovetails into what I said earlier, is to check in with that therapist, because there's a whole line of therapy called cognitive behavioral therapy, which specifically works on that issue, where you will work with a psychologist or social worker on ways to reduce stress, because they will tell you, again, don't take my word for it, I'm not the expert, but they will tell you that stress either causes or exacerbates a lot of mental illness that people suffer, whether it be just anxiety or depression, or more serious forms. And therefore, um, planning stuff out, maybe again with the aid of a therapist, will reduce those stressors, and therefore reduce, either uh, eliminate a potential mental illness, or reduce the frequency or severity of symptoms that you may suffer, again, either going into or during or after your divorce case. So those are 5 tips that I would suggest. Look into them.
Great answers, David, all around. Very,